In this video, we're going to talk about how we factor trinomials by undistributing. So remember, we're talking about trinomials in the form ax squared plus bx plus c. But before we can talk about factoring, we really need to know where this came from. So I'm going to show you some quick examples of that. So if we look at these three problems, if I had started with each of these binomial times a binomial, I end up with what we call this quadratic trinomial because the highest exponent is 2 and it has 3 terms in each of these. So if I multiply these two out and I get this, that means factoring will be going backwards and starting with my trinomial and ending up with the two binomials. So first thing we want to do is make use of our structure. We know that when we factor a quadratic trinomial, it's always going to end up as two binomials because remember, factoring means to unmultiply. So we need to figure out where these terms came from. So in this first problem, we know that the first term came from multiplying x by x. That's actually true for every single one of these polynomials. So we know that when we are factoring, our first term came from multiplying the first spot in each. This last term, the 12, the 3, and the -5, came from the product of the second term in each. 3 times 4 is 12, -1 times -3 is 3, 5 times -1 is -5. So this c value comes from the last spot in each binomial. So now we have to figure out where this middle term came from. So this middle term 7 actually came from distributing out the outside pieces and the inside pieces. So our middle term comes from multiplying those and then combining them. So 4x and 3x combines to be 7x. -6 and -1 combines to be -7x. -1x and 10x becomes 9x. So our middle term comes from multiplying the outside pieces terms together and the inside pieces and then adding those up. So it ends up from those two parts. So now let's take a look at some examples of factoring. So starting with our trinomials and working backward. In this example, we have 3x squared plus 9x plus 6. So the first thing we always do when we are factoring is we look to see if there's the greatest common factor. And we factor that out to the front. So in fact, there is a greatest common factor of 3. So we can actually factor the GCF out to the front. So if I take out a 3, we're left with x squared plus 3x plus 2. So now this is the trinomial that I'm going to factor. So we're going to make use of our structure. We know our answer is going to look like, in the end, 2 binomials. And we also know that we can narrow down some of our options, right? And this 3 is still here. That's why we say factor the GCF to the front. We know that the first spot in each should multiply to be our a term, x squared. Well, there are only 2 things that can be multiplied together to get x squared. That's x and x. So if I write it like that, those are my only options. I know that when I distribute this, x times x will be x squared. That's the only thing that can go here. I also know that the second spot in each binomial has to multiply to be the last term. So last and last spot is my last. Well, I'm looking for some things that multiply to be 2. Well, our only options are 2 and 1. So because it's going to be a positive 2, we also know that the signs have to be the same. So they either are both positive or they're both negative. A hint to help me figure that out is I can look at the middle term. It's also positive. I know this is going to come from combining the product of the outsides plus the product of the insides. So if I'm combining to be positive, then that means my choice here would be both positive. So these would both be plus signs. So I'm going to put the 2 and the 1 wherever I want for now, and I'm going to check to make sure that this actually works by distributing it out. X times x is x squared. We kind of already knew that because we had it set up that way. If I do my outsides, that would be 1x. My insides would be 2x. And my last would be 2 times 1 is 2, which is what we want. Well, if I were to combine these, 1x plus 2x, I get 3x, which is exactly what I wanted in the middle. So I know that this is the correct factorization of this polynomial up here. So we have 3 times x plus 2 times x plus 1. If I were to multiply this all out, I should get this polynomial right here. In this second example, we have 2x squared plus 5x minus 3. So again, the first thing we always look for is the greatest common factor to see if we can factor that out to the front. 2x squared, 5x, and negative 3 don't have a GCF, so we can kind of skip that step, but we always have to check first. So now we're going to move straight into our trinomial. Again, we're going to use structure. We know that when I'm unmultiplying or factoring a trinomial that's in quadratic form, it's going to end up looking like two binomials. So I'm going to set up my structure. I'm going to set up my spots because I know that these should have two terms each. And then I'm going to narrow down some options. So I know my first spot in each has to multiply to be my first term. Well, the only factor pairs of 2x squared are 2x and 1x. It's going to be the only thing that multiplies to be 2x squared. So I'm going to go ahead and place those in these spots. I know that this last spot in each should multiply to be my last term of negative 3. So some important things to keep in mind here. It's a negative, so I know that my signs have to be one of each. And I know that my only choices are 3 and 1 or 1 and 3, right? And one of them is negative. So what we're going to do is we're just going to place these somewhere. Eventually, you will get much better at guessing where they go, but for now, I'm just going to put them where I think they might go and see what happens. So I'm going to go ahead and put a positive 3 here and a negative 1 here. So to check this, well, we already know the first spot gives me 2x squared, which is good. So I'm going to try my outsides. That's negative 2x. My insides, as if I'm distributing, is 3x, and then my last one would be negative 3, which is good. If I combine negative 2x and 3x, I actually end up with a positive 1x, but I wanted a 5x in the middle. So I know that this is not the correct order. I didn't even get the right number, wrong sign. Or I didn't even get the opposite, I should say. So that means that 3 and negative 1 are not in the correct spot. So I'm going to go ahead and switch them. I'm going to make that a 1. I'm going to make that a 3, and we're going to test this out. So now I have 2x squared, that's good, negative 6x, positive 1x, and a negative 3, that one's good. So if I combine negative 6x plus 1x, I end up with a negative 5x. So I'm close, I got a 5, but it's just the opposite sign of what I wanted up here. When that happens, that means that your signs need to be switched. This is a negative, so I need to make it a positive. This one's a positive, so I need to make it a negative. That would then switch these signs, making this a positive 5x, which is what we wanted. So we know that this is the correct factorization of our original polynomial. These two things, when I multiply them out, these two binomials, I will end up with 2x squared plus 5x minus 3.